Hello, Cardinal Eric Logan of the Apostolic, the Ecumenical Order of Christ. I am the Apostolic Nuncio. We are the Council of Elders, and as a council, we discuss teachings from the living Word of God, Lord RayEl, and his chosen representatives as well among the clergy for the benefit of those watching. This is to, of course, share divine insight and help others live happily in the new kingdom. For that reason, we want you to get the most that you can out of this. So please, if you have any questions or anything you'd like to know, take advantage of this opportunity. Put the questions or whatever in the Facebook live chat. We will see it. Also, if you'd like to invest in your own enlightenment, this is a good time to do so. Our order has assembled the teachings of the return of Christ for your benefit in a book fittingly titled The Return of Christ. Trust me, you need it. Now, to introduce today's council, we are joined by Cardinal Joseph Monti, an experienced ambassador of the Lord. Cardinal Michael Har is the Holy Prophet and the reincarnated Prophet Elijah. Cardinal Adam Wimma is presiding over our African diocese, and Clark Isaac is our interfaith liaison, reaching out to the faithful from many walks of life. Last week, we discussed a lot of the things that are related to several major prophecies that are about to pass as the new kingdom rises. In fact, the past several weeks have essentially been about where we're going. Now, we'll rewind the clock a bit and look at what has been. Today, let's consider heaven's involvement with our history as a species. I think the first most logical place we should start, everyone, is the Genesis creation story, the book of Genesis. And zoom out, look a little bit bigger on that, with a broader perspective. There's more to it, right?
Yeah, there's sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, we're going to discuss the Genesis creation story. There's a lot more to it than what most people are led to believe.
Oh yeah, the original Genesis creation story. If anybody's familiar with it, obviously, who's read Genesis 1:1, it's very vague, but it's pretty much, there's about 14 or so verses that say, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, how? He created the firmament. How? Um,
Yeah, he did
he
all these
created
things
the
that,
creepy crawly things that go over the earth. Well, it doesn't really tell you how any of that actually came into being. It just says he said it and it happened. That's what most Christians believe. That by his mouth just things just appeared out of thin air. There's actually a much older story. Um, For who are familiar with Samaria, we know that Abraham, the father of our faith, came out of Samaria. Noah was Samaritan. Adam and Eve was Sumerian. Even Babylon, ancient Babylon, was located in Samaria.
when we
And
back
there's
up
a
a little bit, the Genesis version of it, I feel like we should look a little bit more at that. The accounts that we have, every verse, as you say, it's just God spoke and it was, but it doesn't really put that in perspective for us as much as it should, or as much as it could, I should say. It's written the way it's written for a reason, I think, but I feel like our viewers should know that there's actually a logical process to this, and that leads into the Sumerian story. They do detail it a lot more, don't they?
Yeah, that's where I was trying to get to. In Samaria, they have what's called the Enuma Elish, or more commonly referred to as just the 7 tablets of creation. 7 tablets, 7 days. You can see a little bit of a correlation. In the Enuma Elish, it says the gods created man. In Genesis, it says the Elohim, which is plural. It is not singular by any means. and it says they created man. Remember the verse, let us create man in our image and in our likeness. Um, it was referring to several deities. One of them is Enki, who we know today to be Prime Cleric Richard Ruff. Another one of them was Ninharsag, the chief scientific officer for the Earth Expedition Party that was led originally by Enki to Earth. And then there was Ningish Zidu, who was also part of the creation process. Then you have Adamu and Adapa, not quite sentient, but not quite stupid. Smart enough to obey orders and do the work, but not on the not parallel to them and to their knowledge and capacity.
Not a liability.
So they created them with the explicit stipulation that they would not be able to breed and they would not live forever. So eventually they would just simply die off. And that's mankind. The problem is that Enki wanted a kingdom for himself. So he basically upgraded their genes so that they could breed. And when Enlil, the prince of the Anunnaki Empire, the crown prince of Anu, the king, who you might know as Yahweh, he found out and he was very angry. So he banished them from the Garden of Eden, or the Eden, which is what?
Genetic manipulation of the plants. You look for and try to make the best genetic line that you can with your plants as you breed them and so on. That's how the entire apple industry came about. But there's a bit more that he did, isn't there? He didn't just give them the ability to breed. That was compounded and made much worse because he also made them, when it says in our image in various scriptures, it's because he used their DNA. He made a bastardized form of a higher race.
Well, it's something it might be a little bit offensive to our viewers, but I call it kind of like the retarded Anunnaki. We are essentially a bastardized version of them. We are, our capacity to think and do things is far less than what they're able to do because they were made by God, obviously perfect, essentially. But like we do with genetic splicing in our laboratories, right? We call it playing God. It's basically what Enki and Harsag did. Is they essentially were playing God. They were creating and splicing genes and trying different variations in order to come up with what we now are. And they essentially settled on the great ape, one of the highest forms of ape, and then they created us. And when Enki,
that's the missing link, right?
Essentially, yes. I mean, there's
so-called missing link, yeah.
It's only a missing link by the fossil record, and this also offers a really good explanation as to why the human mind is limited to only a certain percent of our ability to use it. That limit was by design, and it not just in our
it's
mind.
basically scientists are now finding out that genes have almost like an on-off switch, as I say. Certain genes can be switched off. They're still there, obviously. They call them junk genes now, but they're basically genes that have been intentionally switched off, so that we can't fully utilize the full potential of who we are, essentially. And that was to basically prevent us from reaching their level, because in the beginning, we were created, or mankind was created without a spirit, a moral, spiritual guiding stone. That's why eventually, mankind became so evil that there was a necessary evil that needed to happen. Basically, essentially allowing the flood to wipe off mankind and only save those intentionally save. Obviously, some others survived, as the Bible says, but intentionally save those who were not only genetically pure enough, because there was a lot of adultery happening, mixing of genes, but also a lot of violence. Mankind back then
Outright depravity. Yeah.
created mixed races, and they mixed with the fallen watchers, and created giants who were basically savages. Some of
The
them even
Nephilim, as most
eating.
people know of them.
Yeah, some of them even ate people, as the story goes. And we even have, recent stories. If anyone wants to share one of their stories.
Stories
Well, I think
regarding?
it's, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Clark.
No, I was just curious what stories you meant by that, brother.
Stories of the Nephilim, the
Oh, you
giants.
mean, different accounts throughout history of giants happening in the world.
Yeah,
Or-
like
yeah.
there's one in my mind. There was a recent one in Arizona, and by recent I mean the last, a couple 100 years or whatever. Is the Native Americans found this red-headed giant living in a cave, 6 digits, 2 rows of teeth, human bones everywhere, and they actually barricaded it in the cave and killed it, burning it out.
Yeah, we've heard many accounts of that. And just on a side note for our presenters here, we've got a little chat on the side there. Go ahead and make sure you have that open so that you can observe that as we're talking. So just to answer your question earlier about other stories about the Nephilim, there's modern day accountings like what you said. We've heard about the giant of Kandahar, which basically just a quick synopsis of that story. United States veterans, members of the armed forces, encountered a giant at the entrance of a cave in Afghanistan. And they had found what was remains of other soldiers who were lost in action. And it was their bones, their weapons, their clothing, but nothing else. Just equipment and bones, basically. And so these bones were picked clean. Like this giant was using their bones as like a toothpick, pretty much. There wasn't anything left of them. And they ended up not being able to take this thing down except with the assistance of an Apache helicopter. So just because they had that extra air support, that immense firepower, were they able to take down this beast of a man. And thank God they were able to. But there was a lot of accountings of what had happened there, but also by other sources who were talking about transporting this gigantic red-headed person and what remained of it. So this was corroborated by multiple sources.
If you
Here's a
guys
famous story.
did some research on the giants of Catalina Island, they're giant skeletons of Catalina Island, the Channel Islands, Santa Rosa Island. These are locations off the Southern California coast. They're popular vacation destinations, but it's been lore for a while now that archaeologists have found giant skeletons on those islands, and that's something that's been corroborated by people who I know in that field of archaeology. So yeah, there's definitely enough evidence out there that's more than anecdotal at this point to show for the fact that giant skeletons walk the earth.
Giant
A lot of
skeletons.
those,
Hopefully they had flesh with those skeletons, yeah?
I'm sure if they were living, yeah.
But there's even modern accounts of people that are alive today that have 2 rows of teeth and 6 digits on their hands, 6 digits on their toes.
So there are
on
genetic
each foot.
remnants, traces of this race that was almost totally wiped out.
Yeah,
But
but
I think I want to give
they're
a bit
not
of scriptural
exactly giants
context as
though
well.
anymore.
Hmm?
I was going to say they're not exactly giants though anymore. Most of them have mixed enough of their genes with the rest of mankind that they're pretty much the same height we are, and some of them don't even have 2 rows of teeth and 6 digits anymore. But
there's
they
a
do
really
have
interesting point
essentially
that
they do have essentially the same genes.
it's a really interesting point that Joe brought up earlier about the fact that so much of this corroborating evidence needs to be presented for people to actually believe in this kind of stuff. We keep bringing up that point, right, Joe, that it's necessary to say, like, this is the evidence of it, here it is, here's proof. But why do we really have to prove this? I mean, it should be common knowledge. There's so many historical accountings of it, there's so much archaeological evidence. And yeah, like you see here, the 6 fingers are focused on right there. But it's isn't it clear to us that this stuff's concealed from us?
Yeah, you got to go really digging around in the nooks and crannies of the internet to find this kind of stuff. And sometimes you got to know somebody who knows somebody. It's not just going to be clear as day. You know, you're not going to be watching CNN one day and stuff like this is going to pop up. So yeah, you got to know where to look for good information on this planet.
Yeah, isn't
There's
it
a
right?
reason for that.
Yeah, the reason for it. Yeah, wait, why is it that they're trying to conceal our history from us?
Yeah, well, I mean, at the same time, too, you know, there's a lot of stuff out there that is, might seemingly corroborate some of those claims, but in fact, there's fake evidence or fake photos from it, and that's also intentionally out there to sway people away from, coming to good conclusions on this sort of stuff. The
Brother Eric,
reason why it's being hidden, that's a tough one to discuss, but I would imagine.
it sounds like Brother Eric had something to say about that. What do you think's the reason, Brother Eric?
Well, once that official narrative is questioned more and more, once people begin to have a better understanding of our origins, which is what this whole episode is about, once they begin to really know where we come from and the reasons for why we are here, the actual reasons for it, and who's really in charge and who's really coming back, it begins to put into question a lot of other current power structures.
I just want to make one small mention, corroborating what Joe said. Museums around the world, they all have thousands of bones and tablets secluded away in their back rooms,
Smithsonian is
because
famous for this.
they don't want people to know this.
Yeah.
Including there's many about elongated skulls and stuff like that, which you hear a lot about through the Anunnaki tales of Anunnaki.
Anytime something threatens the official narrative, the Smithsonian is one of the biggest perpetrators of just snatching it up and burying it as deep as they possibly can. They are notorious for this throughout the industry.
So we do want to make one thing very clear to the audience. When Enlil made the executive decision to allow the flood to happen, it's not that he was angry with mankind and some evil deity and just wanted to destroy mankind because he wanted to. It was necessary to wipe the evil off the face of the earth, to basically essentially do a reset, which
Yeah,
is
you got to put
what
it
we're
into
coming to
perspective
now.
of who he was wiping out back then. It wasn't. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was saying that.
Miss something?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, you got to put it in perspective of who he wiped out. I feel like there's a lag happening. I could be wrong about that.
Probably
sure.
right here.
You're coming through clear, brother. Both of you are.
So back then, people were as depraved as they could be. These were not, when we think of how evil it is to wipe out such a large number of people, these did not act like people. These were monsters in every sense of the word. These were an entire race of people who were just as dark as could be.
It's kind
And
of like what we're
I don't
seeing.
mean physical darkness. I mean their souls were black.
It's
And
kind of like what we see today. I mean, the Bible says, "As in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man." It's the same thing you're seeing today. People kill each other, wipe them out, steal, rob, lie, just all manner of depravity and evil, wicked behavior. It's exactly the same as it was in Noah's day today. So if anybody wants uh, to imagine how it was back then, just look at what happens in the world today for their prime example.
It's cyclical, and that's the other thing too about the scriptures. You know, we're talking initially about how the Sumerian historical perspective corroborates what the Hebrew historical perspective displays in the Torah. There's a good reason for that, right? I mean, we've discussed this on past shows, especially when we brought up reincarnation and like subjects. You know, we continue to see the same key casting characters reincarnate over and over again in the same or similar roles. You know, so we're talking about a much now broader, bigger perspective where these key figures, they're not just human in a sense. You know, we're talking about Anunnaki pantheon members, aren't we?
Yeah, a
essentially,
lot of the Lord has said, especially in one of his, I think it was the Pentecost address, that members of the pantheon, the Sumerian pantheon of deities, have reincarnated time and time and time again to guide mankind up to being sentient. They want mankind to be at the same level of parity with the essentially the Anunnaki.
it's a major shift from how things started off. Mankind was originally made, as we said earlier, in a stunted fashion. And I don't just mean stature, I mean in our capabilities. But the entire everything since then has actually been to make us no longer a liability and more of an asset, more of brothers, essentially, bring us up to that level of parity with the gods, as they put it. The whole thought now, the whole human history since biblical days has since the flood of Noah, really, has been to bring once that was done, once that final wipe happened, not final, there's one coming, but once that happened, the goal has been to make the best crop of souls that they could, because they're trying to build the kingdom, they're trying to grow the kingdom, and they'd like us to be part of that. They'd like for humanity to be a responsible society that can coexist with an entire peaceful multitude of races and worlds in the heavens. They don't
It's
want
also out
they
of
don't want
a,
the bad kids in the bad house down the street messing everything up.
it's also out of a sense of responsibility. I mean, since Enki used Anunnaki DNA, they feel pretty much obligated, like a parent would to a child, to raise up the children. And as offending as this might sound, we are children. I mean, mankind is a childlike race. I mean, we haven't existed as long as they have been alive or in existence in the universe, so they are obligated to teach us the ways of being morally upright and being responsible. Um, raising children, not lying, being honest, helping each other, loving each other instead of killing each other and lying. I mean, they
Governing
truly
ourselves in a
want,
responsible way.
yeah, exactly.
One of the ways that the Anunnaki, the Elohim, make themselves known to mankind is through certain signs. One of those signs is the apparitions of the armies of heaven themselves. And that's actually one of the signs that's supposed to precede and coincide with Christ's return.
You got to ask why. Why are the armies of heaven, as they put it, even prophesied it, scriptural, that they would come with Christ or precede Christ on his return. And in fact, they were here 2,000 years ago in Yeshua's time. And in fact, a lot of the miracles can be attributed to the work of angels at that time, cooperating with the Lord.
Well, and
But
that's the point that I was kind of getting to here is there's a continuation from the Sumerian perspective all the way to current day in terms of who is who and how those people and deities are relevant. And there's a consistency there. So a number of the same deities that are within the Anunnaki pantheon have reincarnated, have lived very biblically important lives, and have done a lot to shape the direction of mankind's evolution. And now we see today where the Torah code has been able to identify a number of those key casting characters, one of them being our Lord, the Christ, Lord RayEl, as Enlil, or the incarnation of Enlil. So, and then as well, Richard Ruff, the prime cleric of the EOC, he is according to the Torah code, the reincarnation of the Inki. So at the helm are two of the most important deities within, the Sumerian pantheon.
They are the sons of God, as the Bible called the true sons of God, in not just the spirit, not just the spiritual sense, but literally, they are sons of God. Glenn Cotton asks about the Nephilim. Abominations not sanctioned by God, do they have souls? Or are they demonic beings sentenced to hell? Or can they receive salvation?
I want to answer that if you don't mind, unless you were hoping to. The question whether or not they have souls, essentially every living thing, all things that live have soul. It's really just another word for vital energy, your life force, and to a lesser extent, your consciousness.
The thing that animates you, basically.
Yeah, basically. But this thing, this conscious being that's not just your physical flesh, it's your energy, that is, it is able to grow always. It can grow. It's a question of whether or not it will. It's a question of whether or not it wants to grow, and whether or not it already has. There's for most things like this, there's usually a track record to be looked at from the perspective of a righteous judge. You have to consider track records and potential, and whether or not the Nephilim have soul, I don't think is the right question. I think it's a better question: do they have spirit and experience soul? Such a vast difference of experience that they don't fit the same definition anymore. They're no longer even the same thing. Is how different they are. They don't have that, and whether or not they have something that's heavily debated among the Anunnaki is whether or not a lot of the beings on this planet have a moral intrinsic moral compass, and that's the big question. It seems they didn't have that. Could they choose to have that? Everyone has choice. That's the crux of it. Everything has a choice, all things. What they choose is largely dependent on that moral compass. For someone with that moral compass, doing the right thing doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like an obligation. You have to do it. But not everyone feels that way. And many of those Nephilim, their souls are people today. Yeah, their souls didn't just disappear. Many of them are supposedly, it's a common conspiracy theory that they're still hidden in the earth. They may be, but many of them, keep in mind, this was much of the planet back then. Many of them now are today people, regular, everyday people, and they're exercising their choice to use that moral compass on a regular basis, whether or not they have it. So,
since you brought it up, since we were talking about this, Brother Clark brought it up with the armies of heaven, if you will. So the point that I was getting to is that in the historical perspective, Earth had visitations and mankind was visited on many different occasions. Those are biblical accounts, those are extra biblical accounts. So the whole quote unquote UFO phenomenon is not a age thing. I mean, this is something that's been a long-standing, if you will, problem, I guess, because of the lack of real, I guess, understanding as to what these beings really are. What we know today is that the armies of heaven, aliens, angels, biblical depictions of heavenly hosts, the same beings that were witnessed in the past by the Sumerian cultures, the Mesopotamian, Egyptian cultures, the Anunnaki. And so Revelation 19:14 talks about, the armies of heaven who are following closely behind Christ. Well, so if you check this out, earlier this year, while everyone was, freaking out about the pandemic, right? The Pentagon just sort of quietly started releasing this kind of information regarding UFOs. So back a number of years ago, probably for about the last 2 decades, the U.S. Navy has been seeing these sorts of flying vessels across the skies. There's actually been a spin-off, if you will. You see 2004, 2015, the U.S. Navy off the coast of Baja California was witnessing these types of sightings. To the Stars Academy, which is that one hosted by Tom DeLonge, and some of those guys involved in the History Channel now that were former U.S. naval pilots, they witnessed these events and it sort of messed them up to an extent. They didn't really know what they were seeing at the time, and there was such a huge effort to cover it up by the U.S. Navy that they were sort of dumbfounded, almost having a PSTD like experience from it. So after they were decommissioned and after their non-disclosures were over, they went out on a search to figure out what they were seeing in those sightings and to, see if anybody else had other encounters and to get some clarity on it. So, I mean, understand that this is the kind of lengths that people are going to today to figure out what it is that people are seeing in our skies, because this is a very serious problem that the U.S. government is investigating very carefully, as well as other governments around the world. The military interaction with it has been significant. So, obviously it's important for people to understand. So I'm saying this, guys, because bear this in mind. Whoever's watching this, they're talking with people, interacting with people who are probably some of the few people on the planet who literally know what the heck is going on here. So, people have gone and devastated themselves, quite literally, going to such great lengths to figure out what the heck is going on in our skies. But it's Christ and his armies of heaven, which are surrounding this planet.
That's actually depicted in Revelation 19.
Yep.
If anyone's got that scripture, please quote it. If not, while you're looking for it or what have you. I'd also like to mention that it talks specifically about a beast making in his armies and the kings of the earth and his armies, their armies rather, making war against the one who sits on the horse and against his armies. And it states very clearly that the armies of heaven follow the man on the white horse, and that man on the white horse is very clearly identified through prophetic fulfillment to be the Christ returned, the one whose name means the word of God. So it's ironic, I would say, that we have Space Force being recently revealed as a publicly operated military, new branch of the military, which has probably been in operation much longer than just the past year, but
Certainly.
yeah, it's more recently being revealed.
Probably dating back to World War II and the Nazis and Roswell and all that stuff.
Yeah, we've got Area 51, also known as Groom Lake Air Force Base or Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. People have seen UFO sightings for decades around that spot. They're testing advanced weaponry and aircraft.
I wanted to make two mentions before we kind of move on from this topic. There was an incident, I think it was in World War II. It was in LA where they saw something in the sky. They thought it was a bomber or whatever, and they opened fire. It was a huge article on it. There was spotlights on this object that was basically hovering over LA, and they started lighting it up, throwing almost everything they had at this craft. It's a black and white image, and anybody can look it up. Um, the other thing I wanted to mention too was it's harder today for people to like identify what a UFO is unless it's making really weird movements, because we have the advent of helicopters and airplanes and stuff like that. But in the past, before uh, airplanes, there was nothing in the sky but birds and clouds and everything. So when something actually appeared in the sky that was moving and not the way like a star would move, because they didn't have satellites back then either, they knew what it was. The Romans called them flying shields. Today we call them flying saucers. It's the same thing. Shield back then was circular.
Well, today we have, the video evidence to prove it as well. It's not just anecdotal. And you notice how interesting it is. Pandemic, big, scary. Ooh, everyone is freaking out about it. And then quietly, the government's coming out and being like, here, aliens. They're real. And we're not only seeing them in our skies, but we're documenting them and we're telling you they're real because here's the footage. And those aircraft that are flying way faster than our aircraft, and possibly so for organic life forms as we know them to fly that fast.
Even more so if you consider the USOs, the submersible ones. They're not just seeing them in the sky; they're seeing them underwater, moving at speeds that are just unbelievable. It defies any sort of logic.
That's the interesting
that fast
thing.
underwater.
That's the interesting thing that you bring. It's good that you brought that up because, as I referenced before, the 2 to Stars Academy guys, the military guys, they actually did an episode in Baja California where they traveled to Ensenada, took a fishing vessel out to Guadalupe Island, and the whole time they were interacting with people, especially fishermen. And every single time they were getting stories back of these UFO encounters. And every single time there were 2 consistencies that stood out. One of them was the erratic nature of their flight in a sense of, that's not an aircraft. Obviously, it's not flying in a straight line. It's darting, it's doing things that our modern day aircraft
It's defying inertia.
And then the second thing was every single time it's going underwater. So, which is interesting. Now there's a magnetic anomaly 50 miles north of Guadalupe Island off the Baja coast. Just something to know.
It's kind of, this entire topic makes me want to address the elephant in the room for Christians. They often tend to believe that these things are demonic. I think we need to correct that point. What do you guys think?
Yeah, most people
definitely
believe that UFOs are demons in the sky, but historically demons come from below, not above.
Something else I want to point out, the scriptural background for why Christians seem to believe this, some of them anyway. The scripture that they draw it from is the writing of Paul. Paul warns them that Satan's forces, or even Satan, could come as a being of light. And to them, that means aliens or demons. That's how that translates in their precious heads. But this is coming from a guy who saw a being of light on the road claiming to be Christ. So his account is a bit hypocritical to start off.
Maybe it's a Freudian slip.
Yeah, it's also kind of a Freudian slip because the beings of light are typically
Angels.
of heaven. Heaven is a kingdom of light. God is a God of light.
Demons are typically fallen, like the fallen watchers, the fallen angels. They're fallen for a reason. They've been their ability to have flight has been taken from them. Basically, they're
Yeah,
grounded
they're
here.
earthbound.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're
That's
earthbound.
part of the story. They were cast
And-
down to the earth.
Yeah, and the scriptures that refer
And I mean,
to
in the
the
Bible,
serpent. Sorry, Joe, can I add one thing before we progress from that? The scriptures that
Sure.
refer to the serpent having its legs removed, it's grounding him. It's putting him belly to the ground. That's figurative. It's saying that, no, he's not allowed to go back up to heaven anymore by flight. It's not a magic wand moment. It's technology. It's access.
Would you want to say, Joe?
well, I was just going to say that look in the scriptures, every time it talks about these encounters, whether it's Ezekiel, whether it's even in Genesis, we talk about the creation of man, how let us make man in our image. The sons of God, even with the creation of the Nephilim, the sons of God interbred with the daughters of man. And each and every time these beings were coming from the heavenly realm. They're the heavenly hosts. And, the throne of God being something, not of this world in the heavens. Christ says his kingdom is not of this world. I mean, come on, we're talking about, angelic creatures of God. We're not talking about demons or anything like that, and the scriptures are pretty obvious about that. So if somebody's trying to twist that, that's basically what they're doing, is they're just twisting it around to suit their interests and make it more
It's biblical
exciting, if that's
misinformation.
the case. Like you see it like we're gonna fight against these things, I guess, to make it seem like it's something exciting, more so than, I mean, how can you get more exciting than this topic, but I think that's
Make it
sort of
into a
like the
movie,
motive
right?
behind it. The stuff that I've seen. Yeah. It's but in scriptures it even talks about how the armies of man are going to fight against these beings in the end. So that there's going to be a war against the Lamb, so to speak. I think we mentioned that in last week's episode with Revelation 17.
Yep.
So
So-
it's everything's twisted.
You
I
bring
gotta
up,
ask, guys. Adam, I see you there biting your tongue. You trying to give us all a chance to talk here. What do you have to say on this?
Far as what?
As far as anything we've been discussing, bro, I want to hear from you too.
Well, you guys covered a lot of it. And for those who think it's far-fetched or don't really look further or deeper into this, one thing I like to reference is in the book of Genesis, it says, God created Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve had Cain and Abel. Cain slew Abel, and then Cain went to another place to find a wife. But if you listen to that story, it didn't say anything about creating another wife for him. So this is where it forces people to look deeper, and that's where it led to the Sumerian stories. And so it's a lot of interesting stuff if people pay attention, where they can draw these conclusions. And I think it's very important that people do some more research. And it's good to watch these videos because you guys outlined it for them, so they're not left in the dark.
that was a common argument between Christians and Catholics and theologians, is like, well, where did the woman come from? All of a sudden there's another woman. Where'd she come from? It says
The big
they
problem
had
there
Cain
is
and
that-
Abel. They didn't say nothing about no other woman.
Exactly.
Yeah, the big problem there is that Christians often, and not just Christians, it's a common thing throughout most religions that are extremely devout and pious and zealous, that if it's not written in Scripture, it didn't happen, as though Scripture was all things that happened, yet there's plenty in there that wasn't described that we know happened. Like, there's nothing in Scripture about me having toast this morning. Plot twist, that didn't happen. My point
Brother
is,
Eric,
Your
you might want to
mic is-
adjust your microphone again. It might be
Oh,
sliding
again?
down gradually or something there.
no, it's still there. I
Okay.
do want to. I do want to bring this up. I didn't want to bring. I was actually covering it with my fingers at that moment, adjusting it. I didn't want to bring this up, but my throat is a little bit rough this week, so I'm not projecting as much as I normally would. But yeah, and if something's not written in scripture, they assume it didn't happen. So if it's not written that God made a multitude of people, they assume that it didn't happen or that heaven made it. They assume that Adam
Well,
was the
there's
only one made. That's just,
well,
it also never says that it didn't happen. So
there's also another story that is commonly misconstrued because in Genesis 1 it says Adam or the Elohim created man and woman he created them, and then later it says, well, he made Adam go to sleep and he took his rib and then he created Eve, and they don't connect that they were actually created originally to be man and woman. That's where we get the story of Lilith. um, Lilith was the first woman who didn't obey Adam, and he cast her aside, and that's when God created a submissive woman to Adam.
can you, for the sake of our audience, anyone watching this one to study more, of course that's extra canonical or extra biblical text. Which one is it? Where would they find that if they wanted to look it up?
What was the question? It's very hard to hear you.
You sound very muffled, Eric.
Yeah, you might want to bring it up like a lot closer, because we heard you good when you were leaning down talking to it. So I'm not going to tell you to trim your beard, but that might be getting in the way.
I'll just clip it in my beard.
There's a lot of stories in the Bible that people tend to misunderstand, and it's important for us to look at the evidence in the world and also in other texts that sheds more light on these stories, like what you guys were saying about Lilith and
Other
the creation
thing
story.
to mention, I didn't want to cut anybody off and I keep forgetting, but if anybody in our audience has any questions, like Glenn Cotton did, please put them in the comments. We will answer them during the show or at the very end.
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you
there's
for the
one
reminder
here,
on that.
Mikey.
Matt
Um,
asks,
yeah.
in the beginning means in the beginning of the Anunnaki, the DNA infused humans, not the beginning of time.
Well, yeah, that's actually an interesting question because we're going back to the creation of this earth as we know it, when in fact there was a earth before this that in other books, other texts that we've referenced already, it talks about earth by a different name, a larger earth that was essentially swiped by another planet.
Yeah, it's in the Enuma Elish, they call it Tiamat. And the original creation is very kind of confusing a little bit, because if you read the Enuma Elish, it's talking about different deities and everything, and this great war that happens in heaven, and something happening in Tiamat. This is actually referring to the planetary bodies in our solar system, not necessarily flesh and blood deities. They described it in the best way they knew in their primitive minds to talk about. They referred to the planets as deities themselves. But yes, Earth was essentially very much larger, and people often wonder how the asteroid belt came into being. Well, that's actually part of Earth.
No, that was that was the initial orbit of Tiamat, was where you see the asteroid belt today between Mars and Jupiter. So our planet, before we resided on it, was much closer, right in between those two planets, and what we have today as Earth is pretty much half the size of what Tiamat was.
Roughly, give or take. Nobody knows the exact percentage of what was cleaved off. We just know that it was impacted by a planetary body, and that created the asteroid belt, and it thrusted Earth into a new planetary orbit, basically.
It's interesting to bring this up that we're bringing this up this week, because just this week I've been seeing articles. Scientists are supposing they're putting up the theory or the hypothesis that the moon has a relative, basically a chunk of the moon is orbiting. It's like a miniature moon orbiting. I forget which other planet. It might have been Neptune. I wasn't 100% on that at the time, but basically, what it means is that there's a chunk of our moon out there somewhere. What put it there? An impact.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing here to note is to answer his question a little bit further. Around the same time of this impact, or just after, is when the Anunnaki actually stepped in and began terraforming the Earth, and that's part of the project that led them to creating mankind to begin with. And so, yeah, in a sense, yes, we are talking about the creation of mankind at the creation, or at the beginning,
and also the creation of the earth, because during the terraforming process, you're seeding the earth, you're creating the oceans, basically you're creating life and reseeding it after a great cataclysm basically cleaved it. That's where the stories of creation come from.
Yeah, which is interesting, because our modern day fossil record and the book of Genesis, in those days, in those periods of creation, they corroborate each other. So we see so interesting to know, right? I mean, we are talking about the literal creation or terraforming of a planetary body, and that's what led to our creation, and that's what occurred in the beginning. So yeah, to answer your question in a long sense, Matt, yes, the beginning did involve man's creation. Not necessarily the beginning of the Earth itself, because again, as we explained, there was a planetary body here before us, but yeah.
It's also worth noting that when it describes the creation of heaven in the beginning, it was Anu forming the heavens. He united many worlds together into one empire, and that was one of the fulfillments of the verse of forming the heavens. The Father did that.
There's another thing to clear up. We should clear up is the meaning of the word heaven. Today, there's so many different stories. Catholics call it, on the clouds, white pearly gates, etc., etc. You have other people that believe it's some other dimension. It's not even part of our physical universe. But if you go back just 200 years, let's just go back 200 years, and you ask them where heaven was, they would just simply point up to the stars.
Still do, yeah.
The heavens are
would be the
literally
logical thing to do.
The heavens are literally just habitable planets within the Anunnaki Empire. That's where you get the verse that says, my Father's house has many mansions." It was referring partly to God's throne, Elysium, but also the fact that there's many more Earth-like planets or habitable planets within the cosmos. It's not just Earth that can house life.
Yeah. If they look at our teachings, or look at our book, The Return of Christ, it is clear where he addresses that God created the heavens and earth. The heavens are actually settled planets among the Anunnaki Empire.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, so God didn't actually create the earth, or how most people believe he created from scratch, but more like how someone would have a house and they decorate it. That's how God made the earth.
I mean, there was already a foundation there. He just built upon it, basically.
Made it what it is.
We're talking about the Elohim here, guys, and
Good point.
the Father was part of the Elohim.
Yes, exactly.
And this goes into some pretty great depth on the nature of God and how God's involved in all things, and all creation, and it goes pretty deep.
It does.
And
That's another episode entirely.
Yeah, it's an episode that we wouldn't even be able to complete ourselves. Arguably,
God is still a mystery.
Yeah, arguably even the Elohim wouldn't be able to complete that story themselves. There is a great mystery to God and all of creation. When I say all of creation, I mean everything. So what we know about is what we're told, and what we're able to extrapolate with science and with historical understandings We combine
Yeah,
those
so
two.
we're referring to Anu and the Elohim, the Anunnaki Empire, when we talk about these things being formed, because just almost everything that has been done by them has been delegated, or by, if a building is built, you give the architect the credit for it, even though many hands took part, or many factors were part of the process.
Just like like Cyrus. Cyrus was given credit for rebuilding Jerusalem, even though he didn't lift a finger or a hammer or anything, and didn't lift a stone, but he's the one that gave the order. So naturally, as a king, same with the emperor who built the Great Wall of China. He didn't actually build it, but he's the one who gave the order. It's the same concept.
Speaking of,
Everything was done with a word.
Speaking
Yeah,
of buildings, guys,
an order, a
let's
decree.
let's talk about another kind of building, a building that we're seeing all over the world. I'm gonna try and bring up an image of
I was
this.
gonna say too that people often wonder where Anu is, where King Anu is, where the origin of Christ came from, the Elohim, the Anunnaki, and there was actually what Brother Clark is trying to find right now. There's a pyramid, a small little pyramid, Ecuadorian pyramid that.
Well, you're kind of jumping the gun there, brother. I wanted to bring up like the actual pyramids that we're seeing in the world today, like the things that everybody knows about. I'm talking about
The Great
pyramids.
Pyramid.
Yeah, not just the pyramids in Egypt, but there's pyramids all over the earth. And these pyramids their design is almost exactly the same. They're interestingly, none of them seem to have capstones. They're all flat on the top. And I mean, they can't date these things. They don't know how old they are. They're simply too old to be able to date. So the question arises: what are these? What are they for? And how old are they? And what civilization is this a part of that could be over the whole planet?
There was something too that we kind of skipped over that I would like to kind of backtrack a little bit on. For the pyramids in Mexico, you have their deity Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. Also, you have the story of Eden, where the serpent is the one who led them astray, causing them to essentially be kicked out. Enki was part of that serpent. He was the one that's depicted as the serpent who uh, essentially caused them to get kicked out. But it's not the same as Satan. We're not saying Enki is Satan. The two are obviously separate. But when Satan did arrive, the reptilian race, of which Satan is the basically the ruler of, much of the stories were changed, such as Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was depicted as a reptile with feathers because that's what the reptilians wanted him to be depicted as, a reptile, even though he wasn't. Same with Enki. There's different depictions in Samaria where he's kind of wearing scales or fishnet scales or something like that, and he was referred to as a serpent, even though he wasn't, obviously.
Yeah, there's a common pattern even today of this confusion, the result of this confusion happening when people who do look into the Anunnaki, it's very common for them to assume that the Anunnaki are these evil reptilian overlords. And in fact, the reptilians are one part of the heavenly empire. The Anunnaki are essentially the cap race of that, but they are not reptilians. There are many races, many worlds, and they're separate. If anything, I'd say they're a little bit at odds with their approach to humanity.
Yeah, but Satan is the one that has caused this great confusion within the world, confusing stories of the ancient past confusing the deities. Even, Satan has confused, Lucifer with being himself when actually Lucifer is Christ.
Yeah.
This great confusion is all part of his plan to keep basically mankind stupid.
Well, so there's been
Another-
a lot of confusion on a mass scale, but on a very small scale with a few select individuals throughout history, the true knowledge has been preserved. And even before we've had modern day encounters of UFOs, we saw them show up in some pretty famous artwork and, throughout antiquity. Brother Clark, you had some more stuff on that, right?
Yeah, you want me to share it with the Da Vinci paintings?
Yeah.
Okay, let me bring those up.
So,
too.
I mean, we're talking about Renaissance era artwork that is,
Yeah, that's Da
you're,
Vinci.
Yeah,
you're
things that
thinking
we're
you're looking at a
jumping
modern day
ahead.
photograph of UFOs here, but check this out. I mean, because this is pretty wild.
Yeah, we brought that up earlier.
Yeah, I had it up on the screen earlier while you were talking about this, but just to remind our audience where
Yeah.
it came from. It's not anything new for people to see this sort of thing in the sky. It's not something that's only been happening over the past 50 years. This has been going on for centuries and millennia.
Yep.
Yeah, they never truly left. They distanced themselves a little bit, and they more or less took a backseat guidance role, but essentially they've always been influencing human history.
It's also important to note that even though Satan is the great adversary, he's not the adversary of God. He's the adversary of man, and he's the great tester of man. But he still cannot act without God's authority, God's approval, as
Yeah.
you've seen in Job.
That
he
is
had to be
important,
given
but I feel like
permission.
we should stay a little bit more on topic. It's
I know,
it's
I'm
kind of a
just-
sidebar subject.
It's something that the
And
audience should
Clark
be-
did have something that he wanted to bring up, so I think we should move to that. You were
Yeah, we were
mentioning the
talking earlier
pyramid. We
about the
took a long
pyramid.
tangent from that.
Yeah, thanks, guys. We were talking about the pyramids. We showed on the screen earlier that there were multiple pyramids all over the earth, and this brings to mind that really there's evidence of a great civilization that spanned the entire earth over 100,000 years ago. And that's why they can't date these buildings back as far as they should be able to, is because they're so old that it goes beyond mankind's antiquity. And we keep building on top of these things and redecorating them. That's why they look slightly different from one another. But really the design, the architecture is exactly the same. And that's
More
why.
or less, yeah. It's the same overall design, and there's a reason for that. That 3 or 4-sided pyramid, or more for that matter, is one of the most time resistant, element resistant, tectonically resistant. All the hazards that go along with architecture and building anything, Ozymandias would know, is that time destroys all of these things, but these were put there to last. And that's exactly what they've done. That design, it with just the shape of it, and even using different kinds of stone, it doesn't change much. It's still just, it can stand the test of time. And
one of the
has.
greatest examples is the Great Pyramids.
Yeah,
of Egypt.
they're a perfect example because they point out why these were built to last. They're meant to show us something, right?
It was one of the things Brother Joe might talk on is the fact that a lot of them show signs of water damage. It's something you and I discussed recently.
Yeah, they all have evidence of erosion from water, not just from rain or anything like that, but from
Like
a
a
massive
massive
amount of
wave.
water.
So these are,
Yeah.
Like high
those are-
up.
yeah, they're pre-flood structures. They were around before the flood of Noah. So that's basically what that's indicating, right?
Yeah, and I mean, look, with all these structures, we're talking about blocks of stone that today our long neck cranes can't even lift, quarried from sites dozens of miles, hundreds of miles away, placed into or cut, with immaculate perfection and lodged in place very carefully. This is not all the work of slaves with primitive technology. I mean, we're fooling ourselves, and it's not fooling ourselves to believe that. And we're not just talking about Egypt. We're talking about all over the world. As Clark was saying earlier, we're seeing this stuff. South America, in Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, some of the most amazing structures. Stuff where even I've seen researchers go up to it and they put a compass up to the blocks and the compass spins around, and there's even magnetic anomalies that are tied to these stones, indicative that. And I mean, we're talking about stones that were quarried hundreds of miles away, that have water damage, indicative of a major flood, and the site is located above the tree line, 13,000 feet. So we're talking about some pretty serious stuff here.
They're finding a lot of pyramids around the world that were previously undiscovered.
Yep.
Things that have like a lot of trees and overgrowth that might make it look like a foothill or a mountain,
There's
which are
one
actually pyramids. And there's even one in Baja that looks exactly like a pyramid. It's just got a bunch of dirt over top of it. And it just so happens that there's a gigantic tunnel network that all the locals know about. And there's even a mesa. They call it a mesa, which means tabletop, but it's a flat mountain that people reported that there's strange beings that appear there in the middle of the night that look like they're doing some kind of scientific testing, but they're not human beings. They say they're like aliens or something.
A lot of the stuff they're finding is like 10, 12, 15,000 years old, something like that. So
one of the prime examples of those pyramids that have trees on there was found in China.
I was about to bring that up.
I think one of the famous emperors actually buried in one, but they might have just repurposed it. I don't think they probably built it, but there's tons of them all over, including in the Amazon, just reclaimed by nature.
There's an interesting scripture, but just to outline, of course, there's a lot of pyramids all over the world. Many are discovered, undiscovered, for various reasons, but the pyramids in Egypt are left pristine, at least aside from the erosion. There's nothing growing on them because they're in the desert, but it's somewhat of an anomaly in itself, the way that they're positioned, and it's very clear that it means something beyond just what we see at face value. I want to bring up an image, and if you guys want to talk about this, it's pretty clear what it's alluding to. You can see that there's a particular alignment here.
Which is actually funny because one of our questions was the link to Orion fascinates me. Wonder how that plays into our civilization. That was from Glenn Cotton.
One of the questions, just real quick, one of the questions above that is, are the pyramids energy conductors? Actually, no. The pyramids are literally just monuments. And a lot of people have theorized that they have a greater purpose based on the construction of the inner chambers. But it seems that those inner chambers came after their initial construction. They're literally just monuments.
The Lord has said some of them are used for storage.
Yeah, that's about all their purposes. Their greater purposes, reference point, which we see here, obviously a reference point.
There's a quote from the Bible that talks about this, and it says in the book of Isaiah, chapter 19 and verse 19, "In that day there will be an altar to the Lord in the center of the land of Egypt, and a pillar to the Lord near her border." And that's actually referring to the pyramids and the Sphinx.
I mean, because if you look at it right here, they're in the perfect alignment for Orion's belt. They're actually perfectly situated to represent Orion's belt. There's also other factual anomalies about the greatest pyramid. You actually see in this period, in this picture right here, if you look at the bottom one, it's actually not four-sided. It's actually eight-sided. It's slightly concaved on each side, and that's representing the Saint Germain cross. We have pictures, Brother Clark, if you wish to show them, of a symbol, the cross that we use in on the shields of our crests. It is the sign of the cross, another reference to Nibiru, but it's also the exact shape of a single photon of light, referencing light.
It's interesting. Like if you were to spread that that geometric shape out, it would actually make that Saint Germain cross symbol exactly.
Exactly. Like if you were to fold this in the shape of a pyramid, with the edges actually doing this number instead of being exactly straight, it forms the Great Pyramid. And there's
So what's
also
the message?
other fascinating things about the pyramid if anybody wants to look them up, like the exact coordinates for the Great Pyramid is the number for the speed of light.
That is remarkable. But what does it all mean, Basil?
Well, there's a lot of earlier we're looking at pyramids that didn't have a capstone, right? There's an interesting symbol on the $1 US. I'm sure many of our audience may even have $1 in their pocket. They can take it out and look at it, or they can look it up online if they need to. But it's a pyramid without a capstone, and above that capstone is an eye. It's called the Eye of Providence, or one might know as the Eye of God, descending upon the structure, the Masonic structure that man built. Basically, the symbolism is, and we've discussed this on previous episodes, the foundation of God's kingdom being built on the earth, and inevitably God returning, or Christ coming to rule over that kingdom. That's what the symbolism is for. But there's an artifact that was found in the Ecuadorian region that showed this exact same symbol, and this artifact's thousands of years old. And there was an etching on the bottom in gold plating as well, that read in ancient pre-Sanskrit, which is older than the oldest known writing, which was translated by Professor Kurt Schildman to mean "Son of the Creator comes." And this right here being the constellation Orion underneath it, which oddly enough pairs quite well with the Giza pyramid alignments, the altar in the midst of the land of Egypt.
As if to say that he comes from there, from Orion.
There could be a correlation, yeah.
There's many that theorize that Nibiru actually comes from the Orion constellation, which would line up with many of the astronomers that are trying to pinpoint where what some might call Planet X, Nibiru, Nemesis star system, of which Nibiru is a planetary body of. That actually, it's actually on an elliptical orbit coming from the Orion constellation.
Yep.
There's a verse that loosely refers to this. In fact, it kind of gives people a bit more of a clue from the accounts of Job. I forget the exact verse. I remember reading it when God is presenting His wisdom to Job, to humble Job, and to really give him an idea of how much greater God's wisdom is than man's. He pointed out, he asked Job, loosely paraphrasing here, who can loosen the bands of Orion or bind the Pleiades?
Yeah, that's Job 38:31.
Thank you.
And you quoted it exactly. That's exactly what it says, brother.
Yeah.
So
So
what that's referring to, go ahead, Joe.
No, go ahead. Finish your topic.
Yeah, what that's referring to is the loosening of Orion is what I want to focus on mostly. The Pleiades is remarkable as well, what he's saying there, but the bands of Orion the belt of Orion, essentially. How does it loosen and tighten is the movement of Nibiru. As Nibiru gets further and closer, the band is loosened and tightened. That is what that means. As far as the Pleiades, that's those of you who know a little bit about astronomy, the stars in that group are extremely unlikely. The fact that they've bound themselves together for so long, instead of being hurled apart and completely rearranged by their own gravities, and the gases, not just the stars, but the cluster of gases that you can almost see with the naked eye on a clear night from that far away, all of that should have dispersed or reorganized, relocated, but it hasn't. And that
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
There was a
Brother
weird-
Eric, you were having some issues with your microphone again, like what we had discussed earlier, but this one's a little bit different. It's the feedback issue.
it's a little
Feedback loop?
staticky.
Yeah, it was a little bit of feedback there, but there was something I wanted to bring up to you guys regarding the Ecuadorian pyramid. There was an event which occurred. You may have recalled the comet Elenin. I don't know if you guys recall exactly. I know our panel does here, but our audience may not. Back in around 2012, there was a comet Elenin that was on a strange trajectory towards our solar system. While they observed it, it passed through a solar flare, coronal mass ejection, which sort of illuminated the object, but something strange around it, which showed us the shape of a pyramid, the tetrahedral shape. There's a video that I'd like to share with you guys, and we can discuss that too. I'm gonna go ahead and put it up on the screen.
Yeah.
Give me 1 second here.
I saw a little tetrahedron.
Exactly. On the official NASA stereo B footage of the interaction a few days ago.
It looked like a floating pyramid.
It was the night that you and I were supposed to be in the studio here in Albuquerque. That night, Stereo B, which is one of these NASA solar spacecraft, took a sequence of video frames across millions of miles from Earth's orbit to about the orbit of Venus. That's the distance that Elenin was from the spacecraft that night, 23 million miles. And it photographed Elenin interacting with the solar wind, this spray of charged particles that's constantly blowing off the sun. And because of this ghostly impingement of this radiation in space around Elenin, suddenly a shape showed up, a geometric figure. Elenin appears to have a tetrahedrally shaped geometric, I can only call it a force field, which is interacting with the solar wind, with hydrogen and free protons and electrons that basically recombine to cause it to light up, kind of like glowing when it hits this screen. That shape, that geometry, is incredibly recursive of the geometry embodied in the trajectory. All those 19.5 numbers are now embodied in the shape of the field around this thing itself, meaning it's not just a Bergy bit. It cannot just be a comet. It has to be an actual ship with generators and computers and control, meaning it could do anything from here on.
I think it's isn't that this exact perfect shape to basically bounce off anything from it, like it's completely resistant to wind?
Well, you heard him say the 19 what was it, 19.5 number there, that it had to do also with the trajectory, that the object's trajectory towards the sun was at the same angle of a tetrahedron itself, saying that this thing, not only does it have a force field that's shaped like a tetrahedron, but it's traveling at the same exact angle, that all of this is by design. We've seen it thousands of years ago. We're expecting it to happen when the Son of the Creator returns. The Son of the Creator comes, as it says on the bottom of that artifact, thousands of years old. And the ones who were trying to clue us in on this, the illuminated ones, the Illuminati, with their deep symbolisms all over the world, have been trying to reveal this truth to us subtly.
Well, and that's the point that I wanted to make, which kind of sums up everything we're talking about here. We talk about Nibiru. We talk about the heavenly bodies where the Anunnaki come from. If you read deeper into the Sumerian history, we talk about the possibility of that that planetary system coming from the direction of Orion. We talk about the symbolism there with the son of the creator coming from there, and all the different little connecting points. The fact that there is a real tangible presence here on Earth today that is relevant. The fact that we're seeing symbols both in the sky and here on Earth in many different forms and fashions, which allude to all of this activity. Even though so much of the truth has been hidden and concealed for the mainstream to not really understand, there are those little nibbles of information and symbolism that are out there, which for those who understand, for those who are knowledgeable, it is indicative of not only the time we live in, but also the truth about our origin and our purpose here on Earth. So that's why this topic is so important and so, I guess, comprehensive, if you will, is because with everything we're discussing, whether it's throughout our history leading up to now with all the symbolism involved, it is all tying together one big puzzle, all the pieces within it. And
well, not only
the fulfillment of the story.
Not only our purpose for mankind, but that pyramid symbol specifically, the Eye of Providence, being a clear symbol for the son of the creator, the heir to the rule of this planet, the Messiah, the Christ, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. These are all signs of his return and his establishment of God's kingdom here on this planet.
Well, what is the book of Revelation, right? The unveiling, a great revelation, which will encompass the entire earth. And this is that revelation. We are in those times where that is being revealed to the entire world. So, yes, we are at the cusp of this great revelation to be accepted worldwide. We are at the cusp of the great regime change that we talked about last week between the current world structure and the new prophesied king. All of this is taking effect pretty much simultaneously within reasonable time. So people have to understand that all of this it's coming together right when it's supposed to.
It's something you did bring up, is that it is all tied together, and not just today, not just with our biblical past, but everything. All mythologies are basically representing the same pantheon of deities, constantly renamed, constantly changed, but all stories are pretty much similar. Referencing.
Who would have thought that Christ is the hero with 1,000 faces?
He did have many diadems or crowns upon his head. That goes to show that he's been here more than once, and those crowns are kingships. He's ruled over this planet many times as well.
Yep,
and ruled very well.
He's been to teach us.
Yeah, he is the worthy one of the bunch. When I say the bunch, I mean the Elohim and the Anunnaki is one and the same. So we're happy that he's returned, and we should definitely do well to obey and to be a part of the new kingdom to come, the one that's being established now.
Last question, which we kind of skimmed over, was Lindsay. Lindsay asked, I have read stories about the Nephilim being highly intelligent. Would there be any truth to this? And is there any mention of this in the Bible?
Oh, I'm sure they're highly intelligent. I'm sure that I mean, because they're, descendants of the gods, and they gifted. And during that time, there was a lot of weird stuff going on where it was actually known that they gifted mankind, or whoever was here, taking place in a lot of those abominations, also gifted mankind with a lot of the, I guess, things that we have today, a lot of the pieces of knowledge that we have today. So highly intelligent, yeah, I would imagine so. But ruthless and abominable as well, yes.
I would say
That's
that
about
not all of them are super intelligent, though, especially if we have accounts of them living in caves and eating people. If they were so advanced, they probably wouldn't be resorting to wearing loincloths.
Primitive and barbaric as well, yes. But
Yeah. There's
It
probably
takes
a
all
few different
kinds.
classes within the Nephilim.
I'm
Not
sure.
all are the same. So to put it so broadly, to say that all of them are highly intelligent, maybe.
if you were to take a measurement of intelligence based on brain size, yeah, their brains were a lot bigger,
Brain
but
size,
doesn't
that's never
mean,
been a measure of intelligence.
yeah, but that's what I was saying. Like, that doesn't mean that they were exactly intelligent. Some might have been, and some might
It's a
be
bit
very
like
much
asking if
today.
people are intelligent.
Yeah,
Some are.
and understand this, Lindsay. We're drawing from what we can interpret from what's been given to us throughout history. So for us to give one blanket answer, as you can tell, is a little bit difficult for us on this topic, because there's not a clear, cut and dry answer.
And there's not a whole lot of examples of the Nephilim still being around, and those that are, I mean, honestly, they messed up by revealing themselves. So those probably aren't the smart ones.
Right.
Yeah. If you've heard of them, they probably weren't that bright. It's the ones
Yeah.
that you didn't hear of who are doing something well.
So I don't think we have any further questions, Brother Eric.
All right. Well, I think we've done a good job of kind of bringing this all forward so far in terms of why all this history, why it matters today. It's because it's coming full circle now. The king is here. The kingdom is close, immeasurably close. But I would hope that everyone is doing what they can to get into it or make themselves worthy of it. That's what this whole human adventure has been about, after all, is making ourselves more worthy, more desirable as citizens of a better world. You got to be it if you want it. So those of you, I always want to end this stuff on notes of gratitude. Some of you are doing what you can to help, and I love you guys. Thank you for that. Whether you're donating or tithing or sharing, spreading the word, talking to somebody, being a light in somebody's life of this knowledge, this light, that's what knowledge is. Sharing it, thank you. And supporting it, also thank you. And thank God for you. You will be blessed in that. That's not something that's forgotten. Not now, not later. Anyone who's interested in that, we've got donation links at the bottom. You can hit share. You can do, if you want to do it, you'll find a way, basically. If you want to help, you'll find a way to help if it's in your heart. God knows your heart. He's looking at your actions. So, and ours.
Brother Eric, can I say something?
Go ahead.
I just want to plug some of our other shows. We have Sabbath service every Saturday, and that's all across the globe. We've got it with the whole church. We've got it with Baja Sanctuary, and we've even got it in South America with Brother Jimmy. And we've also got a new live show called The Seventh Trumpet that I like to do Monday through Friday at noon Pacific Standard Time. If you'd like to tune in specifically, I'm sorry I don't recall all the times for Sabbath service, but for Baja Sanctuary, Sabbath service is at 1:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time every Saturday now. And we look forward to seeing you all there.
Yep. Also, if anyone watching this would like to take the next step, become more involved, be a bigger impact on your own future and hopefully the future of someone else who can benefit from your growth, we are taking disciples. The discipleship is wide open. It works on an individual basis. So if you'd like to be Cardinal Michael's disciple or Cardinal Joe or Cardinal Adam or myself. We're all taking disciples, and that will give you a one-on-one window into all the light that God can give us together. So you're
More
encouraged to do that.
personalized experience too, more personalized touch.
Yeah. We can dig through our skulls for all the knowledge that we can muster. All right. I think we should probably wrap it up now. I think we're just about all the time we've got for the day. So thank you all. And again, thank God in Lord RayEl's name for this opportunity. Take care. Love y'all.
Take care.